If someone intended to cheat on their spouse but at the last moment backed out and didn't go through with it, would this still be considered adultery? My wife's friend was a real snake, manipulating her and pushing her to cheat. I noticed the red flags in time and started taking action. In their early 40s, a couple followed my wife and her boyfriend, not yet her lover, to a hotel. Luckily for me, I followed them unnoticed by my wife and her companion. I remembered what the receptionist had mentioned during our previous conversation. My wife and her companion, Harold, carried small bags. He had his arm around her waist, and they were impeccably dressed, trying to pass as a married couple. Although she seemed to resist his touch, she glanced up at the large mirror behind the reception desk. In contrast, the couple behind them was different. The man was dragging a sizable suitcase and several bags of clothes, while the woman carried a small travel bag. They were dressed in practical travel clothes, suggesting they were married and well-prepared for a weekend getaway. I managed to take a few photos of my wife and Harold reflected in the mirror. I watched as Harold handled the check-in process. The receptionist looked at me, and I nodded. She smiled back, seemingly enjoying the unfolding drama. I could sense the tension building amidst some whispered curses. I noticed that my wife distanced herself from Harold as they turned. The receptionist said something that caught her attention, making her pause, then handed her the envelope I had provided. Finally, the couple in front of me exchanged a knowing look, communicating silently, and the man let out a loud sigh. Then things started moving quickly. My wife hurried out with her small suitcase, and the receptionist handed Harold the second envelope I had given her. With that, I turned around and headed toward the exit. And so begins the story of how we got here and what unfolded afterward. It all started at my wife's office Christmas party. We were there with her friend and her husband, Frank. I didn't particularly like Frank, but he was tolerable. We made casual conversation, and he seemed decent, though we didn't share many interests. He enjoyed golf and cricket, while my passions revolved around classic cars, DIY projects, and gardening. When Frank and I returned with our drinks, I followed closely behind my wife when I overheard her say, "I wouldn't mind having his shoes by my bed." I glanced across the room and noticed that everyone's attention was focused on Harold, who had recently joined the bank. His arrival had stirred quite a buzz among the female staff. Standing just over 6 feet tall, weighing around 80 kilograms, with wavy blonde hair neatly styled, Harold exuded a certain charm reminiscent of a Greek Adonis. Despite being on the same level as everyone else, he seemed comfortable mingling with the higher-ups at the bank, radiating confidence. A young, attractive blonde stood by his side, her arm casually resting on his waist. I had spoken to him before, and his demeanor exuded confidence that bordered on arrogance, similar to Frank. Although he seemed pleasant, we didn't have any shared interests. "Why are his shoes by your bed?" I asked. Frank jumped in. I doubt his blonde companion would appreciate finding his shoes there. "Who is she?" I inquired. "That's his wife, Mary. They've been married for 5 years and have a 2-year-old son named Philip, I think," Frank replied, adding, "but she's dealing with some issues." He seemed to have more information but chose not to elaborate on her specific problems. I looked at my wife with an expression of displeasure. In a serious tone, I said, "If you like someone else's shoes by your bed, you should file for divorce first." With that, I headed to the bathroom. I didn't actually need to use the restroom. I was just expressing my disapproval. When I returned, my wife apologized, explaining, "It's just an expression, honey. I would never betray you." I firmly responded, "If I ever find someone else's shoes near a bed you've been in, our marriage will be over." Frank intervened, "Don't be so hard on her." My wife reassured me, "I would never do that, sweetheart. I love you." She took a sip of her drink and then looked down, appearing remorseful. Her friend chimed in, "I'm sure Rob would forgive you for a little slip." I shot her a look, and she playfully nudged Frank. Frank echoed similar sentiments but reacted differently. He laughed and said, "I wouldn't divorce you, sweetheart. You adore me too much. You'd forgive me for a mistake, right?" I had never heard Frank curse, not even under his breath. "You might not like the outcome," her friend suddenly said, her tone changing. She gave Frank a light tap on the arm and added, "I wouldn't do that, but even if I did, you wouldn't divorce me. You love me too much. I don't know Frank well, but judging by his manner, I hope she never makes that mistake. That's when I realized why I didn't like her. She took everyone for granted, including her obviously devoted husband. The conversation unsettled me a bit, but my wife tends to emulate her friend, not always, but enough to worry me. I expressed my concerns to her about following her friend's sometimes questionable advice, reminding her she had her own mind. Her friend seemed to be an expert at influencing people. I had warned my wife to be more independent. Things calmed down a bit after that, though I noticed both her friend and Harold exchanging glances. Her friend's expression gave away her desire. She even approached Harold for a dance when Frank stepped away. From an outsider's perspective, it looked like Harold had asked her friend to dance, and it was a slow one at the office party. I took the lead when it was my company's event. We had that kind of understanding. After dropping off her friend and Frank at their house, we continued home in silence. The cold night wrapped around us in a whispering tone as I expressed my concern about the possibility that my wife's friend, Dee, might pursue an affair with Harold, emphasizing the disrespect it would imply towards both her marriage and Harold's wife. I made it clear that helping her in any way would cast doubt on our own marriage in the future. She remained silent. As the weekend progressed, the atmosphere softened, and our communication returned to normal. My wife, S., received several text messages from Dee, each accompanied by the distinctive sound of a laughing frog. On Saturday night, as we were getting ready for bed, I pulled out an old pair of shoes from my closet and placed them on her side, a playful hint. She laughed, and our connection was rekindled. We made love, and afterward, everything seemed to return to its usual rhythm. But I remained vigilant, keeping an eye on her outfits and the time she returned home. I made sure she knew what she would be missing if she ever strayed or helped someone cheat. We never spoke of Harold again. My concern wasn't so much about her being unfaithful, but rather about her possibly helping Dee in her infidelity. Occasionally, I subtly reminded her of the consequences if I ever found out she was aiding Dee in her betrayal. I highlighted how easily celebrities dismiss their vows and emphasized the importance of fidelity. I shared both real and fictional stories about spouses discovering their partner's infidelity, making it clear that if she ever betrayed me, I would disappear without a trace. One night, I went out with my coworkers, not to our usual spot, but to a bar where one of them had an admirer. To my surprise, I saw Dee there, cozied up with Harold. When I mentioned this to S later, she quickly pointed out that they worked together. However, I had taken a picture as evidence and showed it to her. Her immediate response was that they were also friends, almost as if she had rehearsed her defense. "Does Frank know about this friendship, or is he off playing golf?" I asked, aware that Frank often went on weekend golf trips. She turned away and went upstairs. I grabbed another beer and followed her. As I sat on my side of the bed, I asked, "Did you know about Dee's meeting with Harold?" In a quiet voice, she replied, "She mentioned she might see him this weekend." "Does Frank have any idea?" I pressed. "I'm not sure," she murmured, turning to look at me. "I don't want to get involved." I recognized that look and believed her. We cuddled, and I gave her a warm smile, followed by a tender kiss, pulling her close to my shoulder, one of her favorite spots. No more words were needed. A week later, after a long phone conversation with her mother, S asked if we could visit her parents in a few weeks. They had some minor tasks that needed attention. I had a good impression of Mavis and David, so I didn't mind at all. We drove to Gloucester on Friday. By the time we arrived, it was too late to do much, so S and her mother caught up, talking about old friends, family updates, and local gossip. David and I chimed in occasionally and enjoyed a few beers. The next day, we spent quality time with S's parents. I helped out with some tasks that David needed assistance with. Despite being only 65, he struggled with arthritis in his hands, which made handling delicate tasks difficult. I was glad to lend a hand. That evening, we went out for dinner, mainly so the older folks could enjoy a drink. I took the wheel. Near the end of the meal, S's phone started making that irritating frog sound again. She didn't even glance at it, just put it on silent. "That's the beauty of messages, you can deal with them later," she said. The food was delicious, and the company was delightful. On the way home, I could still hear S's phone buzzing. Once we got back to the house, we had a few more drinks. David had brought out an excellent old gin, so we had a couple of bottles of that. The others were a bit tipsy when they headed upstairs. It had been a wonderful evening, but I couldn't shake the thought of all the messages from D. There were quite a few. Finally, we went to bed, and S was feeling a bit romantic, but it didn't seem right with her parents in the next room. It was strange because, when we were dating, we didn't care about their presence. Sometimes they were even awake, unlike now, fast asleep. Around 1 a.m., I felt the need to use the bathroom, courtesy of the old gin. Seeing S's phone on the dresser, I couldn't resist checking it when it vibrated and lit up. D had sent a message at such an odd hour. Curiosity got the better of me. It was just a preview, but the content was surprising. Oh my God, it's amazing. You have to try it, even just once. The preview cut off there. Despite knowing I shouldn't, I took the phone with me to the bathroom. We knew each other's passwords, so when I opened the message folder from D, I found only previews, indicating that S hadn't seen them yet. However, it was clear from what I read that D had spent the night with Harold, with all that implied. I speculated whether this weekend getaway was disguised as a spa retreat for Frank's golf trip. Without her contact info, I couldn't confirm anything. I refrained from opening any messages. I finished my business and didn't flush, so as not to wake S or alert her to my snooping. I got up early on Sunday to complete a few tasks around David's house. When everyone came downstairs around 9 a.m., I had already made tea. When S placed her phone on the charging dock, it lit up. It seemed she hadn't checked any of D's messages, though I couldn't be sure. Frank must have kept you busy with all those messages last night. Anything noteworthy? I asked. I think she had forgotten about the messages until I mentioned them. She looked at her phone and then quickly disappeared into another room. I could hear her talking to D, but I couldn't make out the conversation. When she returned, her face was flushed. Something had happened. After everything was settled, we packed the car and headed home. As we settled onto the M5, heading north, I commented to S, "It seems like D had a busy weekend." I didn't mention Frank's name, only D's. "Yes, I think they had a good weekend," she replied. As we got closer to home, there was a little conversation in the car. S seemed lost in thought. After we left the highway, we stopped at a red light. Feeling uneasy, I decided to address the issue directly. Turning to S, I spoke frankly. "If I find out that D was involved with Harold this weekend, and you facilitated it by arranging this trip to your parents, I won't be able to forgive you. It will make me seriously reconsider our marriage because I've warned you explicitly." At that moment, the light turned green, and the car behind us honked impatiently. The rest of the 16 kilometers drive home was filled with silence. When I glanced at S, she was staring intently at her hands in her lap. We arrived home a bit early, so I decided it was time for a beer. Meanwhile, S went upstairs to unpack and threw the dirty clothes into the hamper. When she came back down, it looked like she had shed a few tears. Her eyes were slightly red. She suggested ordering Chinese food for dinner to save us the trouble of cooking, and I readily agreed, having already enjoyed a beer. When she returned with the Chinese food, she surprised me by also bringing more of the excellent old gin from the nearby shop. I couldn't help but wonder if she had spoken to D while she was out. I had already set the table, and everything else seemed quiet. As we sat down to dinner, about halfway through, she confided, "Honey, I didn't help D, but I did tell her we were going away this weekend. It wasn't anything special. I organized it so you could help Dad with his hand issues. I never intended for her to use the opportunity to be with Harold, but it seems she took advantage, knowing that you and Frank moved in different circles. I'm sorry, honey. I didn't anticipate her actions, but from the numerous text messages and conversations I've had, it's clear she did. I'm torn. Should I tell Frank or stay out of it? She's my closest friend, and she's destroyed her marriage. What you need to do is reflect on it and make your own decision, the one you can live with, knowing it's the right thing to do. And most importantly, you'll have to face Frank the next time we see them together." After watching a bit of television, I had a couple more beers, and we went to bed. There was no intimacy, just some cuddling. Just before I fell asleep, I'm sure she whispered, "I'm sorry, honey." She came home late from work on Monday, though she called to let me know. I still felt uneasy. During dinner, she mentioned having had a long conversation with D, gaining some disturbing details, but chose not to share them with me, which I appreciated. She made it clear to D that while she kept their conversation confidential this time, she wouldn't hesitate to act differently if a similar situation arose again. She also stated that if Frank would ask her directly, she wouldn't lie. She told D she wouldn't support infidelity and warned her about the possible consequences it could have on her marriage, emphasizing that Frank might leave her. Despite laughing off the comment about the shoes at the Christmas party, it was clear that Frank didn't find it amusing. He was quite serious about it. D assured her that it was a one-time incident, but she decided it was too risky to continue. Harold wasn't eager to repeat it either, fearing the repercussions if his wife found out, especially given the existence of a prenuptial agreement and the skepticism of Harold's father-in-law. Things calmed down at home for a couple of months. One afternoon, I stopped by the local newsstand to pick up a car magazine and then headed to a cafe for a quiet break from the office bustle. That's when I noticed Martin, one of the younger guys from our office, walking in with a woman from the sales department. She seemed a bit older than him and quite attractive, while Martin was good-looking but a bit naive. They ordered their drinks and sat in the booth behind me. I overheard the woman apologizing to Martin for a misunderstanding over the weekend. Apparently, her husband had grown suspicious, leading her to cancel her Saturday night plans. She mentioned avoiding working late for a while and being more cautious with her outfits and the time she spent with Martin. She confessed that her husband had noticed what she was wearing to work and admitted feeling guilty, which led to her increasing intimacy with her husband to divert his suspicions. However, she hinted that Martin satisfied her needs better than her husband. I ran into Martin near the printer while he was alone, or rather, I arranged the encounter. I shared what I had overheard, warning him to proceed with caution. Although I acknowledged it wasn't my place to intervene, he confided that she had told him about her husband's abusive behavior and her inability to leave him because of their children. Once our conversation started, he delved into the challenges they faced meeting secretly and hiding it from their colleagues. I warned him that while the company might turn a blind eye as long as it didn't affect his work, if her husband found out, there would be serious consequences. It felt like I had stumbled into some unofficial guide to infidelity. I grew increasingly uneasy when I noticed that S's phone showed the icon for D, but the annoying frog sound was absent. Why the change? After my conversation with Martin, I was on alert. I watched her clothing, her makeup, everything, but there was no deviation. Always the same style of skirt, the same blouses, similar shoes. Her outfits used to vary with the weather, but now they were consistently identical. She was never late from work without a phone call, and even when she went out with her colleagues, she never stayed out late and often asked me to pick her up. This routine had been going on for about 5 weeks. Something still felt off, though the intimacy between us was satisfying, which also troubled me because I couldn't exactly complain about that. I tried to access her phone, but she had changed the password. When I asked, she explained that someone at work had seen her enter it, so she changed it. Without hesitation, she told me the new password right away. It would have seemed suspicious to check her phone in her presence, so I took advantage of the opportunity when she often left it charging overnight. I found nothing suspicious, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. During her bank's summer barbecue, Frank was absent, off playing golf for the weekend. As a result, Dee stayed close to us the whole time. I had already planned for us to take a taxi home, so I pretended to drink more than usual and made frequent trips to the bathroom, faking being slightly drunk to lower her guard. It worked. I went to get more drinks, and since there was no line at the bar, I returned much quicker than before. When I came back, I noticed that S&D had moved to a secluded area of the garden. Wondering why, I quietly approached and overheard D telling S, "Everything is perfectly arranged. That plan is foolproof, you won't get caught. As you informed me, we've handled every detail, from the outfits and timing to the stakes. I've even registered you for the symposium. If you don't show up, I'll cover for you with an excuse. I've arranged your travel and booked a hotel room in your name for the symposium, just in case Rob checks. It's only once, and you won't get caught." S responded, "I'm still unsure if I want to take that risk." D replied, "He'll be back soon." We can discuss it at work. I'll give you the hotel details in person. Remember, no electronic traces. They didn't mention any names, and their conversation could have been about anything, but based on what I observed, I suspected it involved meeting Harold. I just had to wait. After dropping Dee and Frank off and heading home in the taxi, I said to S, "I've noticed you watching Harold. If I find his belongings anywhere near a bed you've slept in, I will leave you, just as I've said before. I'll disappear." I wasn't that drunk. She looked at me, fully understanding the implication, but didn't respond, just stared out the window. I was pleased for her when she came home excited, talking about the symposium she was going to attend on behalf of the bank. When I asked about the symposium's topic, sensing her discomfort, she responded, "Banking in 2030. It sounded unlikely, but I kept my enthusiasm, just in case I was wrong and such an event really existed. After some research, I found out that the symposium did exist, as she had confirmed. Later, the symposium was scheduled for Friday, leading her to opt for an early departure on Thursday afternoon to avoid Friday morning traffic. It seemed like a reasonable plan, but I suspected that the hotel room would remain empty while S met with Harold elsewhere. It would be foolish for her or Dee to meet him at the same hotel, where many banking professionals, including some of her colleagues, were staying. We rarely spent time apart, so I suggested joining her at the hotel for the weekend to make it a getaway, something we had done once or twice before. She became nervous and mentioned being tired after the symposium, preferring to be at home with her husband in her own bed since she still had to attend the symposium early the next morning. I started looking for nearby hotels. There were plenty of options, which was inconvenient. Despite my suspicions that this might be an illicit meeting, I decided that Sally needed to make her own decisions regarding our marriage. Despite my numerous warnings, I suspected that Dee was influencing her. A week before the symposium, my suspicions grew even stronger. The bank had an office party, and I offered to pick them up afterward, as usual. It would have been suspicious if they refused, so they didn't resist much. I insisted and arrived early, settling quietly in a corner where music played, and several people were dancing. I noticed how Harold led Sally to the dance floor, but midway through the song, she seemed to stumble. I pulled out my phone and looked around. No one seemed to notice me except Dee. Then I saw Harold touch S, expecting a reaction, but nothing happened. I discreetly photographed this incident. Later, they exchanged a kiss, though not particularly passionate, and I captured that moment as well. The music stopped, and Harold and Sally joined the crowd again. Shortly afterward, they returned to their table. Sally seemed visibly drunk, which was unusual for her. She normally handles alcohol well and is very cautious. When she noticed me, she blushed. I wasn't pleased with what I saw, though it wasn't grounds for divorce. I resolved to issue more warnings about infidelity in the future. On the drive home, I asked if Harold or Dee would be attending the symposium. S responded that she didn't know. While waiting at a red light, I looked at her and said, "I find it hard to believe that you don't know if a colleague is attending the same symposium as you. I won't be happy if you're lying to me." The light had turned green, so I only managed a quick glance at her as I drove. She was looking down at her lap. I spoke up. "You know how I feel about dishonesty. If people are sneaking around and you help them cover it up, I'll assume you're involved. And if you ever betray my trust, I will leave. I'll disappear, and you'll never see me again." At that moment, I convinced myself that something was going on, but how could I confirm it? My suspicions focused on the symposium, so I decided to play detective and follow her. However, I had stopped snooping on her phone after Dee's warning about avoiding electronics. But one day, I casually noticed Sally's phone light up with a message from Bestest Western confirming a reservation under Mrs. Jones. Our last name isn't Jones, and the symposium's hotel was indeed a Bestest in Coventry, not far from there. Later, when I checked her phone, the message was nowhere to be found, not even in the trash folder. I had caught them. Multiple thoughts raced through my mind. Giving her one final chance, I took proactive steps by consulting our lawyers and starting the separation process. I obtained a separation letter as a prelude to divorce and even acquired a divorce petition to make a greater impact. However, I doubted she would actually go through with it if given the option. Nevertheless, I felt obligated to take precautions to prevent this from happening again. Even if I didn't proceed with the divorce, what would I do? My dilemma stemmed from my deep love for her, tempered by a firm boundary. Allowing another person to enter her life in that way was unacceptable to me. If she refrained, we could focus on rebuilding trust. It would be a challenging journey with no guarantee of success. The Wednesday night was incredible, though I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. Sally promised another outing that weekend. I reserved a room at the Suich Hotel, not yet knowing what might happen. Taking the day off, I arrived early and struck up a conversation with the manager about infidelity and relationships. She shared her thoughts on how to spot unfaithful couples. Spouses tend to be practical rather than delicate. The husband carries all the luggage, and the wife has a small bag. However, if they're having an affair, both carry small bags, and the man takes the lead in the conversation, often showing physical affection. The receptionist found it all amusing and agreed that my suggestion of addressing them as Mr. and Mrs. Jones would add a humorous touch, especially if caught on security cameras. However, it cost £20. I watched as Harold and Sally arrived, and I followed them into the building. A middle-aged couple came between us. They entered just as the receptionist had described, like lovers. I took a picture, wondering how long their romantic days would last. I heard Harold tell the receptionist, "We're booked under Mr. and Mrs. Jones." The receptionist looked at me, and I nodded. "Of course, sir," she replied, typing on the computer. After handing him a key card, she instructed him to fill out a vehicle registration form. I had orchestrated this part with the receptionist, who seemed to find it amusing. She looked at my wife, who was standing next to her possible lover, and smiled. Then everything changed. Sally's body trembled, and she stepped away from Harold, shaking her head. I think she was murmuring, "No, no, no, I can't." Harold seemed confused, but the receptionist remained unfazed. "The hotel doesn't care what names you provide," she said, "but I believe her real name is Mrs. Sally Harris." My wife stumbled away, leaving. The receptionist added, "I have this envelope for you," handing Harold the envelope I had given her. She then turned her attention back to the computer. My wife stood there, holding the envelope, and the receptionist suggested, "Perhaps you should open it before going to your room." I hadn't suggested it, but it was wise advice. Sally stood frozen. Harold took the envelope from her and opened it, exclaiming, "Oh no!" He handed the contents to Sally, who examined the photos of them kissing and unfolded the paper, revealing an unsigned divorce petition and a separation letter. A note accompanied it, stating, "What you do in the next 30 seconds will determine if you receive a signed divorce petition." Although I timed her reaction, the actual time didn't matter, her actions did. The couple behind them made a startled noise, breaking the silence. Sally turned and ran toward the hotel entrance, passing me without looking back. Harold remained there, looking bewildered. The receptionist handed him an envelope, saying, "This is for you, Mr. GT. Inside was a letter. Your wife has received copies of the photos and details of your planned evening. Have a good night." It wasn't signed. I walked outside. S was making a call on her phone as I headed to my car. Suddenly, my phone began to ring with its distinctive ringtone. Looking up, she saw me. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" I shouted. Dropping her suitcase, she rushed over to me. "I'm so sorry," she said. I pointed to the passenger door. "Get in." Tears were streaming down her face as she climbed into the car. I retrieved her suitcase and put it in the back of the Land Rover. "I'm sorry, honey. I got into this mess because of D," she continued. I chose not to respond. "Is that his car?" She pointed to a black Mercedes parked under the trees. "Are you sure it's an Audi?" I asked. "Yes, I'm sure. He parked it there to keep it hidden," she explained. It was actually a Mercedes EQB SUV, a 50,000-pound vehicle. How could he afford that on his salary? It must have been his wife's money or an inheritance, but those thoughts could wait. I had other matters to attend to. I turned to Sally and warned her, "Don't try to call him." Quickly, she pulled her phone from her bag and handed it to me. Was it because she lacked confidence in herself, or was she trying to show her remorse? I removed it from any operational surveillance cameras, not that I was too concerned. I was prepared to face probation or pay a fine for the damage. My scissors easily cut through all the valve stems of the tires, while the Stanley knife slashed the sides of each one. Even though they were run-flat tires, they wouldn't deflate immediately, but the car wouldn't be drivable, and all the tires would need to be replaced. I then used a 2-pound ball-peen hammer to smash the windshield, hitting directly in the driver's line of sight. It exceeded my expectations. The crack spread in multiple directions, setting off the car alarm. Back in the Land Rover, she asked, "Can we leave now?" "Not yet. I'm not finished here," I responded. The hotel doors swung open, and Harold came rushing out, dragging his suitcase with his phone pin between his shoulder and ear. He was struggling with the car alarm. I managed to snap a picture of him with the hotel sign clearly visible and sent it to his wife. With the windows down, I overheard his conversation. "Honey, it's not what it looks like. I would never betray you. I just checked into the hotel. I'm attending a course, you know that." He paused and continued, "No, I was just helping her." He jumped into the car, only to notice the smashed windshield. Getting out, still on the phone, he exclaimed, "Honey, that wasn't me. I didn't do this." Suddenly, his phone rang again, and I heard him curse. "Now it's time to go," I said, starting the car and driving out of the parking lot. Sally remained silent, tears streaming down her face. Despite her attempts to speak, she couldn't find the words. All I could hear were her whispered apologies. As she calmed down, she turned to me and pleaded, "Honey, can we stop and talk?" I wasn't in the mood for conversation, but it was inevitable. "Not while I'm driving." "At the next service stop," I replied. That's when she looked outside and realized we were heading south on the M5, not north toward home. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To your parents' house," I murmured. "When you started this affair with Harold, you didn't think there would be consequences, did you?" I confronted her. She justified that they had meticulously planned it to avoid getting caught, insisting it was meant to be a one-time, harmless experience, with no intention of hurting anyone. Her excuses spilled out between sobs, making me wonder if Dee had used similar justifications to convince her. Most likely, it was Dee acting as Harold's matchmaker, organizing his affairs for him. It certainly stirred things up at the bank. Maybe I should suggest it, even if it wasn't true. "When you say we, you mean you and Dee, right?" I noted that she nodded in agreement. "I wonder what you thought would happen if you got caught. Dee isn't risking her marriage this time." I continued, "The next stop is just over a kilometer away. You have 30 minutes to convince me not to take you to your parents' house." She began to speak, but I raised my hand to silence her. She sat quietly, staring out the window. When we arrived at the service station, I parked the car and told her to find a quiet spot while I brought drinks. I ordered 2 teas, knowing she disliked them, but her distaste for motorway tea was even greater than her preference for something else. She reluctantly sipped it, her expression twisting in disgust. I had anticipated as much. "You have 27 minutes left," I reminded her, although the time didn't matter, the words carried weight. I know I made a vow at the altar, and while it hasn't technically been broken, I've come so close that it's irrelevant. I've betrayed you, kept secrets, and disregarded our marriage vows. I can't guarantee you'll believe me, but I swear I won't do it again. Let's say I've learned my lesson. I'll cut ties with Dee and quit the bank if necessary." Sally elaborated. She continued, "Dee assured me that everything would be discreet, that you wouldn't find out, and that it wouldn't hurt you. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, like hers. I got carried away with the planning and the excitement. I've only ever been with you, and Dee convinced me that the risk was minimal as long as we planned meticulously. Doubts began to surface as soon as Harold picked me up from the bank, and during the drive there, his driving style was, let's say, energetic. I couldn't help but think, what if we got into a car accident or something unexpected happened? It would destroy you." While Harold was checking us in, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror behind the reception desk and remembered something you often told me. I like the person who looks back at me. At that moment, I hated who I saw. As Harold checked us in, my doubts intensified. I wanted to leave, to go home and confess how foolish I had been. Then, when the receptionist smiled at me, I felt as if she knew I was considering cheating on my husband. If she could see it, I knew you could too. The excitement Dee and I had built up disappeared, replaced by raw fear. Even if I stopped at that moment, it might have been too late to save my marriage. But I know you, if I had gone through with it, it would have been the end. So, I walked away from Harold. Then she called me by my real name and handed me the envelope. I had a feeling about its contents. "So, you were aware the whole time?" she asked. "Maybe you informed the receptionist," she continued, but regardless of how she knew, it was her expression that mattered most. I told Sally about how the receptionist had described her methods for identifying unfaithful couples, mentioning that she and Harold had followed the exact same pattern. "Did you ever consider the consequences if you got caught?" I asked. "I did," she admitted. "But every time I raised the concern, Dee assured me it was foolproof, that you wouldn't suspect anything, and therefore, you wouldn't be hurt. Unfortunately, I didn't even consider how our actions would affect our parents' perception of us if we were caught. Dee orchestrated everything. It worked for her, and I simply went along with it. We planned everything meticulously, no suggestive clothing, no late nights out. Any late night was genuine, and we always kept you informed. I came back early from our girls' nights out, where you picked me up. We made sure not to give you any reason to worry. You know that contributed to your downfall, right?" I responded. "You consistently wore the same type of clothing regardless of the weather. And when you asked me to pick you up from happy hours, it was only to flaunt our relationship in front of your colleagues, out of guilt." "Partly, yes," she admitted, "because of what I was planning to do. But mainly because I love you and enjoy our time together." "Or was it to compare me to Harold?" I asked. "No, that never crossed my mind," she replied, giving me a confused look. "I watched all of that, and I became worried. So I started following you, arriving earlier than the agreed time to pick you up. You were flawless, not a single mistake, until 2 weeks ago at the contract celebration party. You asked me to pick you up at 10, but I arrived at 9 and parked in a corner, unnoticed. I watched you. You only danced once with Harold, and when no one was looking, he touched your chest. You didn't object, which would have caused most people to react. That made me suspect that something was premeditated. And when you claimed to be at a symposium last week, all the warning signs lit up like a Christmas tree. Even if I hadn't witnessed the incident, I would have followed you. But it gave me the chance to take a picture. You were perfect, never late, not even by a minute, which was unusual for you. Sometimes you arrived 5 or 10 minutes late when it didn't matter, and if you worked late, you always called well in advance. I'm sure that if I checked, you were always working. You even asked me to pick you up when you went out at night, a behavior you had never shown before. Usually, I'd offer, but you almost insisted. When you went out at night, you dressed simply, unusually plain, not as elegant as usual. You even asked me for help packing your clothes to make sure there was nothing provocative in there, something that had never happened before. Sally looked down at her tea and softly murmured, "So we weren't as smart as we thought we were." "I feel so foolish for listening to Dee's advice," she continued, "and you warned me so many times. What an absolute fool I've been." Tears streamed down her face, falling into her tea. She composed herself, took a sip of the tea, and grimaced. I had my doubts about going through with it when the receptionist looked at me. It was as if she could see that I was considering cheating on my husband, and if she could see it, I feared that you would too. The idea of hurting you and losing you hit me hard, and I realized how wrong I was. "Honey, I'll do anything. I'll sign a postnuptial agreement, walk away with nothing, whatever you need. I don't like it, but if that's what you want, I'll even confess to our parents, ruin my image and elevate yours. I couldn't do that to them, but that's no excuse. I can't claim ignorance. I knew exactly what I was doing. I thought you'd never find out, that it wouldn't hurt you, and that it would be an adventure for me. I like planning, you know that. I got carried away without seeing the consequences. Every doubt I had was rationalized." "Why?" I asked. "It was about the experience, with the assurance that no harm would come. Dee promised it would be safe and enjoyable. You're the only person I've ever been with, and it was supposed to be a one-time thing. Dee convinced me that the risk was minimal, especially if we planned carefully, based on our own experience of avoiding mistakes. Looking back, I realized he might have been intoxicated by the thrill of getting away with it, thinking I'd feel the same and that I'd share the guilt of infidelity with her, as someone who had cheated with Harold. "So what were you planning to do when you decided not to go through with it?" I asked. "I'm not entirely sure. My first instinct was to take a taxi and go to the symposium. There was a room reserved for me there anyway, and I wouldn't have to confess the mistake I nearly made. But then I realized that would only make things worse. A strange thought crossed my mind. I hoped you might somehow leave work and rescue me. I know it sounds absurd since you received the letter and were already aware of the situation, but those were the thoughts that flooded my mind. I was completely confused and consumed by guilt. I was a fool to let it get this far. I'm so sorry, my love. I want my husband to take me home so I can start making amends, apologize for my foolishness, for ignoring your advice, and thinking I could deceive you. I never wanted to disrespect you, but I understand how it must seem from your perspective. I need to rebuild the trust. It won't be easy, and I'm not sure how, but I can't start unless I'm with you. Please, I'm begging you. I'll get on my knees right here if I have to, but give me the chance to regain your trust and make things right." She took a deep breath and continued, "I need to cut Dee out of my life, and I've probably lost my job. I'm not sure how to handle it yet, but if you take me home, I'll have time to figure it out." We got back into the Land Rover, heading north. Sally remained silent, tears streaming down her face, until I took the next exit, turning back onto the highway toward the north. She noticed and turned to me, saying, "Honey, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I promise you won't regret this." I swear it with all my heart and soul. After about 30 minutes on the highway, Sally turned to me and asked, "Can I talk to you about something?" I simply nodded in response. "If you knew everything, why didn't you intervene?" she asked. "I believe in your independence and your ability to make decisions for yourself. I've warned you countless times, but you chose to disregard my advice. You know my stance on infidelity. Ultimately, it had to be your decision. Fortunately, you made the right choice in the end, but it caused damage, to me, to our marriage, and to my trust in you. However, if I didn't believe our marriage could still be saved, we wouldn't be together now." I heard sobs coming from the other side of the car. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but she had acknowledged her mistakes, and once you recognize your faults, you know how to correct them. We arrived home late. All I wanted was a quiet beer to help me forget the day's problems, at least for a while. Sally went to bed, and when I joined her later, she turned to me and hugged me tightly. Exhausted, I drifted into a deep sleep. Sally got up early the next morning, bringing me a steaming cup of tea in bed. She was already dressed for work. Still tired, I accepted her kiss and her words of thanks before she left. Having taken the day off, I spent my time wandering around the house and the garden. I wasn't sure when to expect Sally back, but I received a text saying she'd be home around 2, which was earlier than usual. When she arrived home, she poured herself a generous glass of red wine and brought me a beer. Despite the early hour, it seemed like she needed a drink. She explained her day at work, detailing how Dee had turned pale when she walked into the manager's office. Sally revealed the events that led to her absence in Coventry. HR was called in, and she bravely recounted the entire ordeal, staying composed and holding back tears. She admitted the likelihood of losing her marriage and expressed her readiness to resign. She was sent home with instructions to wait for a call. Later, she met with a lawyer and quickly scheduled an appointment with a junior member, resulting in a draft post-nuptial agreement by noon. The agreement stipulated that if she engaged in any extramarital affairs, she would forfeit any claim to the assets. Surprisingly, there was no mention of any potential infidelity on my part. Underneath the printed text, she wrote, "This is a free pass to fix your mistake." I intervened, offering a humorous suggestion of a trio with 2 women, including her. After a brief exchange of opinions, I erased all the handwritten additions, making her smile. Taking a sip of wine, she turned to me and asked for guidance on how to handle Frank, a mere acquaintance, not a close friend, who happened to be the husband of an old friend. She wasn't sure of her next steps. In my opinion, I thought we should inform Frank, but in the end, the decision was taken out of our hands. Dee was fired the following Monday without the usual 1-month notice. Apparently, she didn't have enough funds in her bank account to book hotel rooms for her sexual contacts. This wasn't the first time Dee had done this, and she was dismissed immediately. She lied to Frank about the cause, but someone finally informed him of the truth. It turned out her affair with Harold wasn't an isolated incident. True to his word, Frank divorced Dee, and she left town. Harold also went through a divorce and lost nearly everything due to a prenuptial agreement. He had an accident, but I had nothing to do with that. Later, I learned that Frank had been on a golf trip with friends when the accident occurred. As for us, Sally didn't lose her job because she showed up, but she was reprimanded. She worked diligently to regain my trust, and despite her lack of confidence after Dee's departure, I believed in her. I kept an eye on her circle of friends. She didn't lose her job, and we focused on rebuilding trust, though it would be a challenging journey with no guarantee of success. Story 2. We've been married for 8 years. We met in the workplace, and after my wife got pregnant for the first time, we decided that it would be best for our situation for her to stay home with the kids. It was a mutual decision because she didn't trust leaving the children with daycares or babysitters, and I made more than enough money to take care of all of us without her working. After our second child, we decided that we needed to upgrade our housing situation to accommodate our growing family. We were able to find a relatively decently priced house that fit our needs. Because of its cheap price, there was a lot of work that we needed to have done on it. I was busy with my full-time job, so I couldn't take over the project. So, we ended up hiring a contractor. I left the decisions on who to hire to my wife since she would be the one dealing with them most of the time, and honestly, as long as I had my office space and my home to my liking, I didn't really care much about what the rest of the house looked like. She hired a newer contractor who had recently graduated from a technical college with skills in electrical work, plumbing, and HVAC. It seemed like he was a well-rounded contractor that could take over quite a few areas that needed work in the house. He usually worked during the day, so I never really saw him. He was gone by the time I got home from work around 6 p.m. One day, when I had a headache at work and decided to come home a little bit early, I realized that he was quite good-looking. I hadn't known that he was an attractive man before I agreed to hire him. I wasn't jealous, but it made me a little bit uncomfortable knowing that there was this man in the house who my wife would have been crazy not to find attractive. I trusted her, so I didn't think she was going to do anything with the man. When I saw him for the first time, I joked with her about it, and she thought it was ridiculous. Whenever I would be home from work, she would tell me about everything that happened during the day, what the contractor had told her, and what they'd done. From the sounds of it, it seemed like they were generally out of each other's hair. One day, there was a small fire in the office, and after the fire department came and put it out, our boss just had everybody go home early because of the strong smell left behind. I was so thankful to leave. It was a Friday, and I was going to be getting a head start on the weekend, so I was thrilled. That feeling instantly vanished when I walked into my house and heard silence inside. My wife's car was in the driveway, and the contractor's van was there too. I expected to hear noises of him working or at least some sign of my wife being there, but there was nothing. I had made it a habit not to yell for my wife when I got home to avoid the possibility of waking up her baby during their nap, so I walked through the house looking for my wife. When I made it to our bedroom, I heard the noise inside before I opened the door. There was a soft, fighting noise, and every now and then, I could hear stifled moaning. Right away, I knew what I was going to be walking into if I opened the door. I braced myself for what I might see when I opened the door, then pushed it open. Of course, my suspicions were confirmed when I saw the contractor in bed with my wife. They didn't even notice me right away. I yelled at them, asking what was going on, and the contractor jumped away from my wife. She sat up, trying to cover herself and telling me that it wasn't what it looked like. I couldn't understand how she could try to rationalize what I had just seen as being something else. But I stormed out without saying a word or even bothering to listen to her excuses and checked myself into a hotel for the night. I spent about half of the night tossing and turning and trying to think of what my next steps would be. I had absolutely no desire to be with her ever again, but filing for divorce and saying I caught her cheating would only be my word against hers. She could easily lie and say that I was accusing her of something false. I needed proof. After doing some digging online, I learned that I could look at my detailed phone bill to see what calls and text messages had been sent out. Apparently, the providers keep records of all of that. The more I looked, the more I realized that what happened with her and the contractor was not a one-time thing. They communicated quite often, and some of the text messages that they shared were very explicit. I saved that information so I could use it in our divorce filings, but I still felt like I needed to do something else to get revenge. I knew that if her parents found out about what she did, they would practically disown her. I was family to them, and knowing that their daughter cheated on her husband and stole a happy life away from her children would upset them. In the morning, I gave them a call and asked if I could come to dinner with them sometime soon because I was planning a surprise for my wife. All the while, she was texting me and calling me nonstop, begging me to come home and telling me to think about the children. As she was thinking about the children when she was cheating on me, I had dinner with her parents, and her sister came along as well. While we were there, we caught up, and they asked me why I gathered them all, and I told them about what happened. I showed them some of the tamer messages between her and the contractor, wanting to spare them the gory details of what their daughter was saying. They were appalled by her behavior. They called her later that night and told her how disappointed she was and how wrong she had been for throwing away a good marriage. I knew she felt badly too, and she wanted to do what she could to fix it, but I wasn't going to hear that. I took the evidence that I had to my divorce attorney and started the filing. In the end, I let her keep the house that she and the contractor had built together, and I bought a new one for myself. I didn't have to pay any spousal support because she had violated the terms of our marriage, so she was forced to get a job. We now have joint custody of our kids, and we try to be amicable with each other so they aren't hurt. This story reflects the pain and disappointment that can arise in a marriage due to a partner's infidelity. While the protagonist's decision to file for divorce and protect their interests is understandable, involving the wife's family could have worsened the situation. It's important for each person involved to find a path to healing and move forward.